समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to The Print. This is Bidisha and you're watching Economics. Today, I want to talk about a risk that hides in plain sight. It's not oil, it's neither inflation, it's not interest rates, but something far more fundamental: fertilizers. Because if you strip an economy down to its foundations, it does not begin in markets or ministries. It begins in the soil. Let me start with a simple proposition here. India's fertilizer problem is not just about dependence. It is about inefficient dependence. And that is what makes it risky as well as dangerous. India today relies heavily on imports for key fertilizer inputs: phosphates, potash, and indirectly natural gas for urea production. In stable global conditions, this is manageable. But in a world of geopolitical fragmentation, export controls, and supply chain disruptions, this dependence becomes a structural vulnerability. And unlike many other imports, fertilizers are indispensable. But the deeper issue lies within. Because before we talk about how much we import, we need to understand how we use what we already have. And for that, we turn to one of the most important ideas in economic thinking that can be applied to agriculture. In the 19th century, the German chemist Justus von Liebig formulated what we call now Liebigs Law of the minimum. Now, this is often explained simply, but it is actually a very profound, optimistic principle. At its very core, the law tells us this: output is not a function of the total quantity of inputs. It is rather a function of the most binding constraint. In modern economic language, Liebig was describing a system with perfectly non-substitutable inputs at the margin. That means you cannot compensate for the shortage of one input by adding more of another. If phosphorus is deficient, adding more nitrogen does not solve the problem. It just accumulates inefficiency. Liebig illustrated this with the metaphor of a wooden barrel. Each plank represents a nutrient: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The height of the shortest plank determines how much water the barrel can hold. Now, here's the deeper insight. If you keep extending the taller planks, for instance adding more nitrogen, you're not increasing capacity. You're simply increasing the imbalance. The system remains constrained regardless. Now, translate this into India's fertilizer economy. In theory, fertilizer use should follow a balanced NPK ratio. But in practice, India has structurally overused nitrogen. And this is not accidental. It is the outcome of price distortions. Urea is heavily subsidized, making it far cheaper than phosphatic or potassic fertilizers. So farmers responding rationally to prices tend to over-apply nitrogen. Now let's come to the chart on your screen, because this is where theory meets evidence. The chart tracks the ratios of nitrogen to phosphorus and nitrogen to potassium over time. In a system moving towards efficiency, you would expect convergence, a gradual stabilization towards an optimal ratio. But what we see instead is extreme volatility, sharp swings, persistent deviation, and repeated spikes in nitrogen use. Now, here is where we should pause, because this is not a random variation. This is systematic behavior. In years where productivity weakens, nitrogen usage actually rises, which means that when the system is under stress, farmers double down on the cheapest input available, and that input is urea. So the chart is not just describing fertilizer use, it is revealing incentive structures. It shows that decision making is being driven less by agronomic optimization and way more by distorted price signals. And once you apply Liebig's framework, the implications are clear. If nitrogen is no longer the limiting factor, and in many regions it isn't, then additional nitrogen has zero marginal productivity. In fact, beyond the point, it becomes negative because it degrades soil quality, it worsens nutrient imbalance and reduces overall efficiency. And that is exactly what we are observing now. Soil organic carbon is declining, reducing the soil's ability to retain nutrients. Micronutrient deficiencies like zinc and iron are becoming widespread. Soils are experiencing chemical stress, acidification and salinity, and most importantly, the fertilizer response ratio is clearly falling. Each additional unit of fertilizer is producing less output than before. In economic terms, we are deep into diminishing and in some cases even negative returns. Now here is where inefficiency becomes macroeconomically relevant. Because in a closed system, inefficiency is just a productivity issue. But in an open economy, inefficiency translates into higher import demand. If you use fertilizers inefficiently, you will need more of them. And if you cannot produce them domestically, you would import more. Now layer that onto global realities. Fertilizer supply chains are concentrated. Natural gas is geopolitically sensitive, phosphate and potash are dominated by a handful of countries, so when disruptions occur, India cannot easily adjust. And because we are inefficient, we are even more exposed. So inefficiency does not just coexist with dependence, it actually has started amplifying it. Now policy has tried to respond. The Soil Health Card scheme in 2015 was designed to correct information asymmetry, giving farmers soil-specific nutrient guidance. It also represented a shift towards evidence-based agriculture, attempting to align farmer behavior with scientific recommendations. But without correcting price incentives, information alone has a limited impact. The PM Pranam scheme attempts a fiscal solution by rewarding states for reducing fertilizer consumption. It effectively tries to internalize the cost of overuse at the state level, nudging policy innovation. But again, if urea remains artificially cheap, the core behavioral driver remains unchanged. So what we have is a system where the theory is well understood, the distortions are visible, the policy intent exists, but the structural correction is incomplete. Now, what do countries do differently? For instance, China integrates fertilizer policy with energy and industrial strategy, ensuring both supply security and efficient usage through large-scale soil testing. Indonesia secures upstream inputs, prioritizing domestic gas and controlling distribution. Israel maximizes efficiency through precision agriculture, delivering nutrients directly to plant roots with minimal wastage. Brazil improves soil quality and tailors fertilizer use to crops, thereby maximizing productivity per unit of input. Different strategies, same underlying logic, they reduce the binding constraint and they optimize the system, and in fact they respect Liebigs Law. And that is precisely where India needs to move. Because today, we are not constrained by a lack of fertilizers. We are constrained by how we use them. Let me leave you with this. The most powerful economic ideas are often the simplest. Liebig's insight was not just about agriculture. It was about systems. Growth is limited not by abundance, but by an imbalance. And right now, India's fertilizer system is imbalanced. We are adding more to what is already abundant while neglecting what is scarce. The real policy challenge then is not increasing inputs, it is identifying and correcting the constraint, because that is how you move from inefficiency to optimization. You move from dependence to resilience. Thank you for watching.